I'm going to handle the first half of the presentation and then pass everything over to Skip. I'm April Query. I'm the CFNC Regional and Community Services Manager, and then we have Skip Watts joining us, who is the 828 East CFNC Regional Rep. We've both been with CFNC for a long time, and we're happy to provide you with this information this morning. This is a quick info slide here before we dig in. CFNC is a partnership of lots of different organizations working together to create these resources for you. CFNC.org is a website. There's actually no building that houses College Foundation in North Carolina. You can see some of our partners in the circle there. College Foundation Incorporated is directly who we work for. We're located in Raleigh, although we're scattered around the state. We are not in Raleigh. And we are the first state to provide a resource like CFNC, where it's one place for students to go and access all of the planning, applying, and paying for information on the website. So lots of wonderful free resources, and let us know how we can help you. So we're going to dig into some FAFSA, really line by line information. So wanted to provide you with a screenshot where you can see where you will begin. On the left, you can see the homepage for the FAFSA.gov website. And then on the right, you can see that myStudentAid is also an app that you can download on your phone. And students can fully complete the FAFSA at myStudentAid, which you can see the FSA. It's the bottom middle, sort of, where you can download the app there to complete it. Most of what we provide you with this morning is going to be information from the actual web page, and we have just a couple of snapshots that will show you information for the app. But we certainly didn't have time really to go through both, and I don't think there's a need. So as you begin the FAFSA form, as you can see in the top left, students can log in either as the student or the parent. So if the parent's completing the FAFSA for the student, they can put that they're the parent. And then towards the other side of the screen here, you can see where you can log in with your FSA ID. So we do have one snapshot a little later in the presentation that reminds everybody where to go to get their FSA ID. If it's possible for families to go get that FSA ID, which is their unique login, we encourage you to do it before the FAFSA if you can, just to save yourself a step. Go knock that out ASAP. But if you don't have your FSA ID before you start your FAFSA, you can certainly get it at some point in the FAFSA. You will need it at a couple of different places in the form. So you can certainly get it at that point. Who needs an FSA ID? The student needs an FSA ID as well as one of the parents. So the student needs one and one of the parents. We encourage you to put it somewhere safe. Families to put it somewhere safe. Don't lose it. It can be a little bit of a pain to try and retrieve it. We've heard from families, so just try to hold on to it. So one of the first tips we can provide you with starting the FAFSA form or share with your students is to make sure they're completing the correct year form. Okay, so this snapshot was taken from before October 1st, but the new 22-23 FAFSA form became available on October 1. October 1 of each year is when the new FAFSA form becomes available. But one of the first tips we give families is to make sure they complete the correct form. It can be common for you to think, well, we're in the 21-22 school year now, so let me complete that form. And that's the incorrect form to complete if you have a senior and they'll be heading off to college for the 22-23 school year. They'll need to complete the 22-23 form. So just make sure they're doing the right year. The save key is important, so it's just a temporary sort of login for them to return. So if you have any families starting the FAFSA and they're going to save it and come back to it later, the save key is temporary for them to use to log back in, and something else they want to make sure that they hang on to and don't lose. And it's just a short little login to help them do that. So I just wanted to make sure we gave everyone a few tidbits. We're going to talk about, focus most of this on dependent students with parental data, which is going to be most of our families. Of course, that's not the case for all of our students, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the majority of the information here is going to be for students who are providing parent income and demographic information on the FAFSA. So you can see at the top of the screen the different page titles as you go through the FAFSA form. We're going to start with student demographics. And this is just essentially basic information they will be putting in about the student, name, date of birth. The student does need to make sure they put in their their legal name information, not any sort of nickname they go by. So if their name is Alfred and they've been going by, Skip, I don't know, just make that up. They need to make sure they put Alfred in and not Skip there, okay? So they need to put in their basic information here, continue to follow the questions. Some of the most common questions that we get on this page is the second question here, what college degree they'll be working on, to make sure they plug that in, if it'll be their first bachelor's degree, and then it says, what will your college grade level be when you begin? So students will often say, well, I took some college classes, so I've attended college already. Well, if they're in high school and they're taking college classes through CCT or dual enrollment, they're still never attended. They've not been a full-time college student. Also, if you have any early college high school students that you're working with, they also are never attended first year. So if they're taking college classes while they are a high school student, they are still a first year, full-time college student once they begin working on that associate's, bachelor's degree, whatever it might be. If they're interested in being considered for work study, I usually encourage students to select yes for that, even if they aren't sure, because then if they're eligible for work study, which is a need-based program, they'll be offered it in their offer letter. And then they can always decline it if you end up not wanting to participate. So usually encourage students to go ahead and say yes for work study, and then they can decline it later. A little better than changing your mind later, especially if money's run out. Right? So along with student demographic information, you'll see a question, are you a foster youth or any time in the foster care system? That will make a student independent on the FAFSA form, just so you know. And there are some funds available for foster students, so make sure that you answer that question correctly if the student or the student qualifies for that. And then they'll just complete information about parent education levels. All right, so the next section is school selection on the FAFSA form. And this is really important because the process for financial aid really begins with the FAFSA form. And the colleges that you list here will essentially have access to your FAFSA results to offer your student the award letter or their offer letter to let them know what type of aid they're eligible for. So you want to make sure you're listing the colleges that you're definitely applying to and that you're pretty sure you're going to apply to. You can list up to 10 colleges here, and if for some reason you're applying for more than 10 colleges, you will see instructions on the FAFSA on what to do if you're going to apply to more than 10 schools. But most students, 10's enough. So one tip for this is as you plug in your high school information here, so do your high school information, it'll find your high school. This is what I want to do, your college information here. So one tip for the college is that sometimes students will do, you'll plug in your state and then you'll put in your city and then you'll go ahead and type in your school name, the college, and it will logged out. There we go. Sorry, I got a message. I clicked on the wrong thing. So it will say, oh, that college doesn't exist. Well, you might have plugged in North Carolina State University, and perhaps in the FAFSA form, it's listed as NC State, and so it won't pull up exactly what you're trying to type in. So long story short, we encourage you to plug in your city, and then it'll give you a list of colleges that you have in that city in North Carolina, and you can select from there. So sometimes you don't want to type in your school name just because it makes it harder to find it. So for this example, it's found the University of Iowa, and you will check that box that you want it listed on your FAFSA form, and you can keep going until you have all the colleges there that you want to receive your FAFSA information. Okay. And then the FAFSA form will ask you about your plans for housing. Make sure you list that information there. That can affect your cost of attendance. So that's important because cost of attendance includes all of the expenses the student will likely incur for 1 year. And cost of attendance can vary from student to student. If you're living on campus or off campus, if you're going to live on campus, are you going to live in a dorm or a suite or an apartment on campus? Are you going to have roommates? And so that can vary. So just important for students to go through and answer each question correctly. Okay. So I'm going to talk about dependency status for just a couple of minutes here. This is one of the most frequently asked questions regarding the FAFSA form, I would say probably the most frequently asked questions are dependency, and then who is the parent on the FAFSA, which Skip will cover that in a few minutes. So this is essentially the Department of Ed asking the student, trying to figure out if the student is dependent or independent in terms of financial aid. Could be a very different definition of what you personally or your parents personally think is dependent, you know, in your household. This is for federal aid, so different definition. So essentially, you're going to go through and answer yes or no to these questions, and I'm going to outline them in just a moment. But if you qualify for any of these, or if the student qualifies for any of these, they'll make sure they need to check the box, because these are the items that can determine that they are independent for FAFSA reasons. So what's the main difference there? What does it matter? So if the student is deemed independent for financial aid purposes, parent information is not going to go on the form. So parent information, parent finances, it's not going on the form. So it can make a big difference in terms of how much aid you're eligible for, as long as you're doing your FAFSA form nice and early. If most students are dependent, which means, you know, parent information is going to go on there. But this is essentially what will make a student independent, okay, for financial aid. If they're at least 24 years of age, okay, not 18, not 21, 24 is the magical number. If they're married, because then their spouse is going to go on the form instead of parents. If they're in graduate school, they're independent. If they have children of their own that they're supporting financially at least 50%, that makes them independent. Okay? If they're active duty or veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, that makes them independent. And these are all the things that you were seeing here as the student goes through and reads these things. This is just how we typically lay them out when we give financial aid presentations, and it's just easier to me to see them listed like this. Okay. And then the last section of what makes them independent is if at any time since turning 13, the student's parents passed away, they've been in foster care or a ward of the court. Those are some items that make them independent. If they're an emancipated minor, they're independent. This next one is probably one of the most common ones we see. If they have a legal guardian, they're independent. Not custody. So let's say they've been staying on their aunt's couch for the last 6 months because there's an issue with not getting along with parents. That doesn't count. If their grandmother has custody, that doesn't count. We need a legal guardianship in order for them to be considered independent on the FAFSA form. So sometimes that piece involves a little bit more conversation, but that's a really important one. And then we'll talk about homelessness with the FAFSA form. We have one snapshot that shows you that, and it's towards the end of the presentation. But if the student is homeless or at risk of being homeless, they'll self-report on the FAFSA. That can make them independent as well. Okay, so those are some really common things we get asked, especially about legal guardianship. So that's good information to have nice and early in case families would qualify for legal guardianship but haven't actually gone through the steps. Okay, and a lot of those things do require some more communication between the student or their family and the financial aid office at the college they want to attend. So you will see, along with those dependency status questions, an option to provide or not provide parent information. If the student clearly is dependent and is able to provide that parent information, they need to proceed that way and provide it. Otherwise, they're going to end up being asked by the financial aid office, and that's down the road, and aid could be gone. So answer correctly if they're able to provide that. Okay. So the parent on the FAFSA form. Okay. So this is the next piece that was the most commonly asked question with the FAFSA form, and that is, who are the parents on the FAFSA form? Okay, so the FAFSA is asking about parent 1 and parent 2, about the demographic information and financial stuff, and this is another thing we get a lot of questions about. So who are the parents on the FAFSA? So pretty simple first situation. If the student's biological or adoptive parents live in the same house as the student, that's parent 1 and parent 2 on the FAFSA form. Okay, it doesn't matter if they're married to each other or not. Okay, so biological or adoptive, all in the same house, great. That's your parents on your FAFSA. So what happens if they don't live in the same household? So maybe they were never married, they're legally separated or divorced. Keep in mind the FAFSA form is really just concerned with one household's information. So figure out the household, and then you're going to answer all the questions about that one house that they live in, okay? So if the student lives with mom and mom is single because she never married dad, they're legally separated, or they're divorced, okay? Student lives with mom, and mom is not remarried, okay? That's the only parent that's going on the FAFSA. There is no parent two, okay? If mom remarried and there is a second parent in the house, the second parent is parent number 2 on the FAFSA if mom remarried. Okay, so the big question here is if the student lives with biological and adoptive parents, and if it's only one, did that parent remarry? Are they single in the house? Okay, if mom lives with boyfriend, so student lives with mom and mom's boyfriend, boyfriend is not listed as parent 2 on the FAFSA. They do count as far as household members when you get that question on your FAFSA, how many people live in your house, but they're not providing their income information if they haven't remarried, okay? So,
April, a question came in.
Yeah.
If a parent does not want to share any information about themselves on the FAFSA, should a student select that they cannot provide info on parents?
So if the student's parents, which this does happen sometimes, if the student's parent is saying, I love your kid, but I'm not doing this, forget about it, then they're unable to provide the information. They can check that they're unable to provide it, and then the student needs to reach out to the financial aid office ASAP and talk about what the situation is. And this is where sometimes students are going to have to give some private information. So is everything, you know, kosher in the house? It's just mom's like, there is no way on God's green earth I'm doing this. Well, unfortunately, the student really is only going to be eligible for loans at that point. Okay, that's really all that it's going to be. If there's another situation, so let's say the student talks to mom sometimes, but mom has a drug problem and she's not been staying there, she's been staying at her friend's house and things really are not okay, and that's why you can't provide the information, you have to let the financial aid office know, because they can do a professional judgment for a special circumstance and kind of make you independent if you can provide some sort of documentation that proves, which might be a letter from the school counselor, from the college advisor, what the situation is. So sometimes you've got to tell people, the student's got to tell folks their business to make sure that the colleges understand why they can't provide parent information.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop now and pass this over to Skip to do the second half of the presentation, and I'll help monitor the chat. Thanks.
Thanks so much, April, and great job. It's going to be a hard act to follow. One thing I want to reiterate, students, you have to advocate for yourself. If you've encountered one of those special circumstances, it's contingent that you reach out to the financial aid office and that you work out that problem with the financial aid office. Now I'm going to pause real quick and I'm going to answer a question in the chat. Do both parents and students create an account for just the student? Yeah, when you're completing the FAFSA, the parents will have one FSA ID and the student will have one FSA ID. If it is a single parent that's widowed or never married, they're going to have one FSA ID. Or if it's two parents that are married or living together, they're also going to have one FSA ID for the two of them. Okay, so moving forward. In this instance, we have the parent marital status. So parents, you're going to have to indicate whether you're married or remarried, and you'll have to indicate when you got married or remarried. There's going to be some personal information the parent's going to have to input. This is basically just demographic information. So parents, make sure you have your social security number in mind moving forward. The parent tax filing status page. This is a really important page because I encourage all families that are completing the FAFSA to consider linking to the IRS data retrieval tool to complete the FAFSA. Essentially, the IRS has a way that they can auto-populate a family's financial information if the family chooses to use that link. I encourage them to use that link not only because it expedites the process, but it also helps limit potential errors that would be input from the family. So again, if you can link to the IRS, I have a slide down here with the bottom. You can see the link to the IRS option down there. That is, again, the IRS data retrieval tool.
Hey, Skip, real quick, for the current FAFSA, what tax year are families submitting? Is it the 2020?
Great question. Yes, we're going to be using our 2020 tax information to complete the 2022-23 FAFSA. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that.
No worries. And just one more question. If they don't use the IRS data retrieval tool, are they more likely to be called for verification?
Yes, they are gonna probably be verified. And verification essentially is when the federal government or the college the student hopes to attend goes through the FAFSA and in a sense audits to make sure that all the information input into the form is factual and accurate. I encourage families to try to avoid that verification process because it is essentially another step or hurdle we have to jump through, because in effort to solve that problem, we have to provide the college or the federal government with a copy of our IRS tax transcript from the calendar year 2020. So let's just try to avoid that verification step and link to the IRS. It'll just make this whole process a lot easier and a lot quicker. You can use the IRS data retrieval tool on your PC, or you can use it on your phone. Here we have some screenshots about what that will look like if you choose to use it on your phone. Regardless, if you're going to complete the FAFSA on your phone through the Student Aid app, make sure you are in a secure wireless environment because you will be inputting some personal identifiable information in there, and we want to make sure none of that leaks out. Now, once you have successfully linked over to the IRS data retrieval tool, you can then click OK, and it'll basically start to auto-populate information from your taxes into the FAFSA. But one important point to make, what information that is required from you to input into that DRT has to match your taxes completely. So if you're filing a 1040, make sure you have that in hand because you will want to input that demographic information exactly how it's stated on your tax return from the calendar year 2020. Now, the student IRS info is here in the upper slide. You can see that they didn't have an adjusted gross income. All that was transferred over. You can see student income from work right here. It said they did not file an IRS Schedule 1K1 form, and boom, we're moving forward. The parent IRS information, you can see that automatically auto-populated from the IRS data retrieval tool. They're going to have their adjusted gross income in there. They're also going to have some parent income after work. So, or excuse me, some parent income from work down below in that second slide in the lower right-hand corner. So parents, you're going to have to input some untaxed information that will not auto-populate from the IRS data retrieval tool. So if you have paid child support or received child support, housing, food, other living allowances, payments, tax-deferred pension and retirement savings, etc., you're going to have to input that information manually after you come back out of the IRS data retrieval tool.
I'll just say one of the questions that I get a lot is about child support. So in North Carolina, it ends when your student turns 18. And so parents will ask, do I really need to plug it in? My student's turning, 18 soon. And you do need to make sure you put all the information in correctly from, you're talking about, 2020. I know this says 2019, but so for 2020. So you'll want to make sure that you plug it in, and then colleges are used to that. So communicate with your college. I've had financial aid offices say, no, you received that income last year. We're not making a change on that, even though you won't have it next year. And then I've also heard colleges say, no, we know that you won't have that income next year. We'll make adjustments on our end. So sometimes stuff can vary by college, but plug everything in correctly and communicate with your financial aid office.
Valuable points, April. And another point just to reemphasize, every college operates a little differently in regards to how they award your student. So just be prepared for that. There is no federal or state mandate that says one school has to operate exactly like another with regards to awarding financial aid. Now, going back to the slide, parent assets. Parents are going to have to input some information about your total cash, savings, and checking account balances. You'll also have to put information about investments, including real estate outside your residential property. And you'll also have to input information about any investment farms that you may or may not own. Please note, parents, you will not input any information about your 401k, your 403b, or any other retirement savings accounts. Students, you're going to have to input information as well into the FAFSA about your financial situation if you worked in 2020. You can obviously link to the IRS if you so choose, and I encourage you to do so. Students, you're going to have to input information about your assets as well. That's going to include your cash, savings, and checking account balances. If you have any investments, you're going to have to report the value of those investments, including real estate investments. And then students, if you have a small business that has over 100 employees, you won't have to do the FAFSA because you've got plenty of money. But if you have fewer than 100 employees, you will have to input information about that small business or your investment farm if you have one. Most families do not use a preparer to help complete the FAFSA. If you are using perhaps an accountant to help you with that process, you will select that. But most of the time, families, you're going to complete the FAFSA by yourself or with somebody from the college environment to help you complete the process. Again, FAFSA Day, October 23rd, CFNC sponsoring an event to help you complete the FAFSA. And then again, we will be having FAFSA drive-through events throughout the year to help you complete this process moving forward.
Yeah. Well, in the prepare thing, so just because they're a tax advisor doesn't mean they know anything about the FAFSA form, just FYI, if you have any families that are thinking that. My husband's a financial advisor. I would never have him complete a FAFSA form. He doesn't know anything about this, y'all. It's a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing. It's you know, FAFSA, federal financial aid is its own baby. So don't use anyone. Don't pay anyone to do this.
In my experience over the last decade plus, I rarely, if ever, see somebody select that they use to prepare. It happens very seldom. Okay, so this is your FAFSA summary page as we move through this process. This is a breakdown of all the information that you've input into the form. I think the next slide is going to have this in further detail. You can see student demographics, you can see parent demographics, the schools that you're inputting in. I encourage students to input every school they're interested in attending, up to 10 different colleges or universities. And now we get into the signature options. I encourage families to sign with their FSA ID. It expedites the process, but you can also print a signature page if you so choose.
And I know this is being covered over in tricky situations, but if you have any students that parents are not eligible to get an FSA ID because of their immigration status, you can have the student print a signature page. That's what you want to do. So if parents can't get an FSA ID because of their immigration status, they definitely will need to print a signature page and submit the FAFSA form now.
And then send it in, exactly. Okay, so this is an example of what a student will encounter if they choose to sign the FAFSA with their FSA ID. Once the student and parent has completed that process, they'll get a breakdown of their social security number, and they can click Submit My FAFSA Now in the lower right-hand corner of that page. Now, once they have submitted those FSA IDs or electronic signatures, then we have our congratulatory page. Students can find their data release number at the top left-hand corner of this page, and I encourage them to take a snapshot with their phone in case they choose to add additional colleges to their FAFSA. Lastly, on the second slide, families can also see their expected family contribution, or EFC, in the financial aid world. The EFC is what dictates your eligibility for need-based programs in the financial aid community. Here we have a relatively low EFC at 2,592. The lower the EFC, the more Pell Grant eligibility the student has.
And it's not happening this upcoming year, but down the road, I won't say when because we never know when things might change. The EFC is going away. It won't be on the confirmation page anymore, which I'm thrilled about because I think it's more confusing for families than anything else, because like Skip said, that's not what you're paying out of pocket.
Yep. Okay, this is what those FAFSA summary pages are going to look like if you choose to use the mobile app. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Again, make sure you're in a secure wireless environment. You can see here, Jasmine has completed the FAFSA. She has a very low EFC of 0, which means that she is eligible for the maximum Pell Grant. Now, independent students, we discussed this just a little bit. Bear with me for a second. I live in a multi-generational house with a lot of different dogs. They're barking. Okay, so independent students are going to file the FAFSA without parental information. They're going to select no. They don't. They're not going to input any information about their parents. And now the student aid report, or the SAR. We make everything in the financial aid world an acronym. The student aid report is going to have everything that is in your FAFSA form. It's going to be basically a summary of that FAFSA form. You can view or print your student aid report. You can also see, you can make corrections if you choose to, and you can make a shareable document. This is, again, what your student aid report is going to look like. You're going to have all of the different information that you input into the FAFSA. It's going to be outlined there accordingly. And then some families are going to be eligible for an automatic 0 EFC. That means they have no need to complete any remaining financial questions, because again, the input that they've already put into the form shows that they don't have to input any financial asset information. So this is the parent tax filing status page. If a parent is an automatic 0 EFC, or student rather is an automatic 0 EFC, they're probably not going to have filed any tax information from 2020. And so they can't use the IRS data retrieval tool, which is indicated in this slide. Oftentimes, if students don't use that IRS data retrieval tool, they will be verified by either the college or the federal government. This is information that parents input from their work. They're going to actually have to input wages, salary, tips, etc. after they complete the IRS data retrieval tool process. Then you're going to have the option for parents to skip remaining asset questions if they choose. Now, special circumstances and the impact of not providing parental information. So let's discuss that just a little bit further. In this instance, the dependent student is unable to provide information about their parents. So they're automatically going to get flagged at the financial aid office level, and they're probably going to have to be verified, or they're going to have to supplement with some additional information. In this instance, the special circumstance might be because they're not living with their parents, they don't receive financial support, the parents didn't file them as dependents on their tax return, etc. The student is then going to have an unsubsidized loan option. And at that point, in this instance, the student indicated they have special circumstance and they're unable to provide parental information. Now, homeless circumstances are unfortunately increasing in North Carolina and nationally due to the pandemic. And in these cases, the FAFSA filer is going to have to follow a certain path forward. They're going to have to indicate that they've been at risk of homelessness. And they're going to also have to put in some student information about how they can verify that housing situation. In this instance, a high school counselor or a homeless district liaison is probably going to have McKinney-Vento support to support the student's claim of homelessness. Now, in this instance, if a student is in fact at risk of homelessness or homeless, they're going to indicate that their household size is 1. There's 1 member of the family in the calendar year 2020, and then, or 2021, excuse me, and then the number in college, of course, is going to be 1. So next slide. All right, more student homeless filter questions. In this instance, the student selected the same radio button. So yes, they're at risk of being homeless. But down at the bottom of the next slide in the bottom right-hand corner, they selected that they don't have any verification from a McKinney-Vento liaison or a district homeless liaison. So they selected none of above and then hit next. And now they get a message they've indicated that they're homeless or at risk of being homeless, and they selected none of the above. Now they're going to have to answer some specific homelessness questions moving forward in order to verify that housing situation. Now, once the family completes the FAFSA, the student is going to have to be diligent about checking their email, because colleges are going to communicate with them via email. If they have to complete the verification process, the university or community college is going to reach out to them via email and let them know of that process. They're also going to have to respond to any questions from the financial aid office via email. They might receive, in fact, they almost certainly will receive that financial aid award through their email. They're going to have to reply to any aid, admission, and et cetera questions. They're going to also have to complete some steps to secure that financial aid. And then lastly, they might have to notify their campus of outside scholarships, because oftentimes that can affect your aid eligibility. Now remember, guys, we can complete the FAFSA this month. It opened up in October. Financial aid is first come, first serve. So let's try to get this FAFSA done sometime in October or November, if at all possible, so that we can maximize our aid eligibility. Again, you can use the My Student Aid College app to complete your FAFSA on your phone, but don't wait to meet your college's deadlines. Don't wait until you're admitted to a university or community college. And remember, every year we're going to have to complete this FAFSA to be made eligible for financial aid opportunities. Now, some additional resources I want to cover are those on CFNC. We have a plethora of different videos and instructionals about how to complete the FAFSA. We also have outreach programs that each individual rep promotes. And then lastly, you can also call into our 866 number during FAFSA season, Monday through Thursday, to get assistance. Again, these are your local CFNC representatives. I alluded to us all a few minutes ago. We are broken up by area code outside of the 828. And the 828 area code of the far western part of the state, we have split that region up between myself and my colleague Devin McCarthy James. Other than that, again, I want to reiterate that we do have Spanish services representatives that are available. We do break that in half with them by the state, so we try to accommodate all interest that we can. Guys, you can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat. We're really trying to be involved with social media. If you want to follow one of the reps, we will be, for example, Skip at Facebook or Skip at Twitter. At CFNC, excuse me, you can see down here our various handles for social media. And then lastly, we want to be available for North Carolinians to answer questions and allay concerns. So please mark down our telephone number, or feel free to visit cfnc.org to take advantage of all the resources we have available.
And we had one question, and actually I'm going to leave this slide up so that everyone can jot that down if they want to. We had a question come in the chat that I think would be good to share for the whole group. How would students be contacted for verification? So for whatever reason, they've been selected for verification. They may be selected and get notification about that through their email. And it could be the email they listed on the FAFSA form. So that could be a personal Gmail account, or it could be the college email account. So the student needs to be checking their email through the colleges as well, if they've been issued a .edu, the UNCW email, or whatever it is. Or it could be in the mail. So they could be selected a variety of ways. The biggest thing with verification is if you have questions, if I was a student, I was first gen, if I'd been selected for verification that first year, I would have been like, what is this? What am I supposed to do here? Reach out to your college's financial aid office and ask. I got this letter, it says I have to verify stuff, and they will try to explain the verification process and what to do it. Verification, it could be handled through the college itself, or a lot of colleges use third-party organizations to handle verification as well, because it's just such a cumbersome task. So just make sure that you are your students paying attention and checking the mail, check their email, ask questions of the college if you have questions about verification, and just know that your financial aid process is really on hold until you've submitted whatever it is that needs to be verified. Verification is being simplified. So what's going to be requested for verification is going to become less. It's definitely a college access hurdle, but that doesn't mean that you will never have to verify the student would never have to verify, what they're putting on the FAFSA form. So it's kind of tricky. Students just have got to make sure they're checking their emails and their snail mail.
Good nudges to make. Thank you for that information, April and Skip. Folks, I know we're coming up on time, but April and Skip, if you're willing to stick around a little bit longer for any questions that may come in, thank you. Y'all can unmute y'all can unmute yourselves to ask questions if you have one, but 2 quick clarifications. I know the FAFSA just opened on October 1, but the class of 22 needs to complete the 22-23 FAFSA with 2020 taxes. So just making that abundantly clear. And then I know a concern for a lot of students may be that their 2020 taxes might not reflect the reality of their current financial situation for a variety of reasons, but they still need to submit what was on their tax returns, right, through the IRS tool, and then contact individual financial aid offices if there is a change for that professional judgment appeals process.
Yeah, and Melissa, you hit the key term there. The student's looking for professional judgment because of that special circumstance. So students, if we're in attendance and we're listening in, you might want to make a note that a special circumstance is the terminology you're going to use.
Great. Any questions from attendees? You can either put those in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. All right.
If you are thinking, you know, this is great, can I get this information to my school that I work with? Reach out to your reps. They are doing face-to-face programs where, you know, rules have been followed. We have certain requirements, masks and social distancing, both for the safety of ourselves and your school, but also we might be going to a different school the next night and we wish not to spread COVID around the state of North Carolina. So we do have requirements, but we're also doing things virtual. So reach out, and then if you visit cfnc.org/events, eventually we are currently working on a statewide financial aid workshop that'll go over, we don't do line by line for those. We talk about some of the FAFSA stuff and definitely dependency and who's the parent and all of these types of things and verification. So a little bit different of a presentation, but we'll be doing a statewide virtual one of those in a few months.
Wonderful. Your CFNC representatives are fantastic resources in your community. So please do, let me echo, reach out to them as a resource to help you and your students. Let me also reiterate that your local community college financial aid offices are also fantastic resources. Even if students aren't applying to their community college, they are excellent resources to help both you, your students, and your families. We will be sending out the recordings, the PowerPoints, and other resources that were highlighted today. So be on the lookout for that in your email in the coming days. And thank you, April. Thank you, Skip, for leading today's discussion and sharing all this great information. It's good to see you all.